Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, April 16th, 2025, and today we're asking the questions that you've been asking in international education. And as we do each week, we take our news stories from our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings, and that newsletter is called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And in case you're wondering what SMIE stands for, that's S Social Media and International Education Consulting. And we started these live chats in July of 2017, so we're coming up on almost 8 years this summer of roundups, and we give you an opportunity to subscribe to that newsletter through our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and I'll be dropping the link to the most recent edition in the chat in just a moment. But you can also get that via LinkedIn. And the email version comes out into your inbox at about 9 a.m. Eastern on Monday mornings. And then if you subscribe via LinkedIn, you'll get that earlier, about 30 minutes earlier, on about 8:30 on your LinkedIn feed and your notifications. So we're really happy to say that we've crossed now between the two versions, the LinkedIn version and the email version. We now have 2,500 subscribers getting the SMIE news each week. So we're reaching parts of the international education community I never thought we'd reach. So very proud to be influencing and coming into the homes and workplaces of so many international educators in the United States and beyond. So thank you all for that. But within the newsletter, we cover different topic areas. We have a section on social media, which can cover anything from webinars coming up that week, actual social media stories involving international education, webinars. It can include data reports, insightful blogs, new research, AI tools, all of these kind of things that are more digital focused. There's a section on there for that. And then we also have a big picture news, which these days is being filled by a lot of reactions to the Trump administration's policies and how many students are being impacted, all of that. And then a section on solutions, and we can't get enough of that section these days in terms of responding to the challenges we're all facing in our field. Then beyond those domestic conversations on solutions and challenges, we also have a global roundup section that goes through the major destination markets around the world for international students and gives you perspectives on what's happening internally in those countries. And you think, in some cases, you think the grass is always greener on the other side. In a lot of cases, it's not. And that's what we cover in that global roundup section as well. So let's get right to the first question of the day, and that is, how well are you tracking prospects' social media engagement? Now, this is a non-Trump related story, at least initially, and it comes from our friends at the Pi News, and they have had an interesting article this past week that covers kind of the ever-changing landscape for international students in terms of how they're getting their information, what sources of information and platforms that they're choosing to do their research on. And the article itself is titled From Tap to Trust, Rethinking Recruitment in a Mobile-First World. And the idea of mobile-first world has been around for quite some time, but the dramatic change in the kinds of ways and platforms that students are using to research institutions via social media before they even bother going to your website, and what that does to their impressions of you before you even have a chance necessarily to impact them directly through emails and other conversations. So the tag is, prospective international students are discovering universities through social media on their smartphones, long before they ever visit a website or fill out a form. But without the right digital platforms to capture this interest, valuable leads are lost. And I couldn't agree more with this. We're in the middle of something with my current university, the University of Akron in Ohio, and we're working with a partner that I'd met actually about almost 4 years ago. Met him at an ARC conference in Miami. His name's Mauricio Segueria, and he started a company back then called Platy, working primarily with institutions in Australia, Canada, perhaps looking at the Latin American market, where his strength is. He's based in Brazil, and he before I even came to Akron, my immediate boss decided that he had met this person too, and he decided to start working with him. Company's called Platy, and they've developed platforms, online communities that direct prospects to, that they generate through Facebook ads and other online tools, generate them to go to a landing page, fill out a form, and then join this online community. We've purposefully taken this approach because it was something to allow us to focus our attention in a couple countries initially to see how well it went, how we could manage the flow of information that involves us messaging out to those students via typically WhatsApp. We're contacting them based on their information they filled out on this inquiry form, that it's encouraging them to, with a quick intro video, here, come check us out. Great, my name is Marty. I'm working at the University of Akron, and here's what we've got in store for you over the next few weeks. You'll receive all this information, but more importantly, we wanted to get you engaged on our online community platform. Doing that to try and generate interest in that platform, that where we have a current student managing it and responding to it to questions that prospective students have, that also where she posts content daily to kind of paint that picture for students on what life is like. And eventually this is going to be a platform where we're again using it just for 2 countries in Southeast Asia to focus on and generate interest to, but also eventually roll it into an ongoing platform that once we have momentum and a number of students engaging and current students as well helping to answer questions, that we really want this to be a recurring point of interest for and perhaps a first point of contact for a lot of students with our Akron community. So that's something that we're doing to try and get out in front, and we're, this company, Platy, is running Facebook ads, directing them to an inquiry form, then they get rolled into the platform itself. So we engage with them through messaging based on their mobile number that they provided, contacting them to see if there's any questions we can handle from an institutional perspective, but again, encouraging them to get engaged on the platform itself and to apply, obviously. So that's something that we're doing, but the article talks about things that that are currently our over reliance on traditional channels to make the first contact through your website, through maybe a Facebook page or a YouTube channel, that students are already ahead of the game. They're doing their own research. They hopefully get interested in your institution by looking at social sites that have peer content about institutions. So they'll search for your institution name, and here's something you might want to do. Maybe you're scared to do it. I would be too sometimes. Scroll on TikTok, go to search for your university name, see what pops up, see how you're being talked about. And then perhaps if you see those kind of folks on there that might be have things that maybe aren't correct, or maybe aren't portraying your campus accurately, maybe working with them to see if they can do a redo and share with them information about your institution. But doing that on DL, maybe not necessarily open messaging them on their posts. But these are the kinds of things that social listening is important to be an important component of any outreach strategy, particularly when you have multiple layers of platforms that you're working on, and not only web content but other digital sources that you're using to generate interest or monitor how your name is being used. So that social listening component typically should fall for the university to marketing communications if there is a unified place for that on your campus. And that may or may not be a task for a social media coordinator in that office. I don't know. But it's oftentimes that piece that it's do we just close our eyes and ignore the noise, or not even bother going looking for it? And by doing that, are we missing opportunities? And that's what the article is basically alluding to. We're missing opportunities to find out what people are saying about your institution before you start putting out content that may or may not be reflective of the kind of thoughts about your institution that students already have in the wider world. So it's an important tool, I think, and change of perspective for marketing communications, particularly internationally, to have a focus on social listening. And that's a lot of this platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube are being used as search engines now. So search for your institution, see what's being said about your institution from non-institutional perspectives, and look at that student creating content from perspectives that are doing research on institutions to day in a life videos, that kind of thing, viral recommendations, all of those. Obviously in China, we're talking about a very different ecosystem of social media platforms, so that's a whole nother conversation, and certainly folks like Sonorbis and others that might be more directly focused on the China market can provide tools to allow you a way to do social listening there. Obviously requires a language proficiency in a lot of cases to understand what's going on, but making that effort to engage in a digital first, mobile first world is really an approach we should all be taking as institutions. And it's not easy. It requires expertise that many of us don't have. We may be familiar with using platforms, but how to use those platforms to do your research on how you're being talked about, that's another step entirely. So what I always encourage any university clients I've worked with in the past, or my current institution, to start thinking a little bit more expansively on how we think about our institution, our brand out in the wider world, and how we respond once we find content that might not be appropriate or misrepresenting who we are as institutions, and take proactive steps to get ahead of the curve. And that's one thing we're trying to do with our community that Platy has arranged for us, that this online community is something that we're directing students to engage, have them engage with current students, to share their questions in an environment where they feel like they're going to be heard. It's a closed environment just for folks who've registered for that. So we do have control over what happens there, but again, we're building in hopefully fail-safes to help us manage what happens in that on that platform once it gains momentum. And I'll certainly be reporting back on that the closer we get to the time where we can actually report something out on these. So we have a lot going on, obviously, in the social media space domestically with different activities that our University Marketing Communications puts out, some student pages, our student profiles that we're trying to use. One thing that this approach in the PI article discusses is finding those influencers that are talking positively about you, and then perhaps contracting with them to produce regular content for you. If you have current students that are already established profiles, content creators and influencers on different channels, working with them, and that's a little bit harder to, well, maybe not harder to do if you've searched properly for your institution and through various social listening tools. But really a great article from on the PI on the international student life cycle of their experience coming into the PI admissions funnel, but also at the back end on getting jobs, and then having those success stories that you can then use and leverage back into your social content in future, whether they do that on their own social content pages or through your own channels. So all of these things are part of that life cycle that you really need to have engaged, not just with prospective students, current students, and former students, successful alumni that we all try to produce. So great article from the PI on that one. So we're going to move on to question number 2. And that has to do with our favorite topic of the year, and that is the legal challenges that are being waged against many of the executive orders that the current administration has put out that impact not just international education, but all phases of, of life in the U.S. Immigration, especially, is under the microscope. And certainly there have been challenges to immigration actions in terms of deportations and other revocation of visas, terminating SEVIS records, which is the piece, those last two pieces are the ones that impact us directly with international education. But will the U.S. legal system save our international students? And right now, that's all we can put our hats on or put our hope in, is that with everything that's happened, it has been, and I described this in a session I did for Washington International Education Conference last Wednesday. It was, thank you very much, Taslim. I appreciate your feedback there. Thanks for that. But what the current administration is doing in terms of, it does tie into social media in a lot of ways, in the way in which the administration has gone about identifying students in particular that are deportable or should be removed from the country or should have their visas canceled or should have their SEVIS records terminated. Now, we've got levels of different, what those actually mean. And in what they mean moving forward is going to be an interesting question, and the courts are certainly going to be answering some of these questions. As some of you may know, what the government said back in January as it was coming into office is that they were going to be using AI to identify individuals who had that were involved in protests. They said specifically at the time, involved in protests, said things that were pro-Hamas that could result in falling into the catchment that the Secretary of State identified as areas of threats to national security, and supporting, as we've talked about here on the Roundup before, threats to national security by supporting terrorist organizations through actions and words is considered against national security, not free speech. That's in the way the current administration has defined it, and most governments would define by non-citizens, and the conduct that has landed some people in deportation proceedings is related to that in the 2 or 3 cases that we've seen popping up. What the lion's share of what is now 1,200 as of Wednesday morning, 1,200 individuals, students that have been deported, or none of that, very few have actually been deported. Some have self-deported, some are in deportation proceedings. Very few are in deportation facilities or detention facilities, you would say. The vast majority, probably 99% of that 1,200, have gotten either emails from their institution that bothered to check the SEVIS records and saw that, as many did around the country, saw that a number of their students had SEVIS records terminated, and then they sent them messages and gave them advice. Some institutions like ours, we've had 3 students caught up in this so far, none of which had any visible protest-related actions, but are from areas that might be seen as, by this government, as potential threats. Countries of origin are influencing this decision, perhaps, but the government did say in January they were going to use AI to figure this out. Who's being anti-Semitic in terms of what they've said online, in terms of being pro-Hamas and all of that content, but they've also expanded that dragnet, that digital dragnet, into this AI tool. Now, we talk about AI often on the Roundup as well, and what it does and what it doesn't do. What it doesn't do well is out the box, all of a sudden, given a quick prompt engineering as part of the how you feed AI, generative AI, so that it can learn and function better. Part of that initial initial steps, if you've ever used Gemini or ChatGPT the first time out the gate, if you're just giving them information about a particular topic, it's just searching existing information about that online. But it may not be the most accurate or most reflective or appropriate information that you're looking for. So what's likely happened, and this is my educated guess and understanding on how quickly all of this got rolled out and implemented, is this AI bot tool that they're using to scour the internet has been expanded from looking for just pro-Hamas rhetoric in terms of social media, in terms of analyzing footage from campus events where things were said and where people could be identified by facial recognition, and in terms of voice, identifying what they actually said. To that initial focus on pro-Hamas terrorist support has been expanded to now include everything from minor criminal offenses, and not even criminal traffic violations, which are not criminal offenses, but any violations of traffic law, and obviously some like DUI, which have in the past been deportable offenses, have caught 1,200 students in a dragnet. And probably some of those have said some anti-Israel things on social media, and that's getting caught up in the mix too. So this is bad AI, generative AI, bad usage of generative AI, because it doesn't understand nuance right out the gate. And in terms of how language is used on social media and what constitutes actual pro-Hamas terrorist support versus someone who's just pro-Palestinian people and their survival, versus the folks in Gaza who have had their territory actually absolutely leveled. And rebuilding would take decades to get back to a livable state. So that is a challenge. There's obvious anger, there's frustration, there's in terms of some of the actions that Israel has taken in what they've done in Gaza, and they need to answer for that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're trying to root out Hamas, root and stem, but it's clear that the devastation in Gaza goes far beyond just uprooting Hamas. There's no objective person that would look at what's happened in Gaza and not see the devastation that's happened there. So that's the frustration that people vent on social media, and that's always it's now becoming quite the learning moment, frankly, for everybody to watch what you say on social, and I've said that forever. I mean, they're back 15 years ago, when social media was really taking off. You would see when Facebook was being used, and as a reason for things people said on social media, reason why that students were being denied by some admissions people if it was a borderline decision. What people say on this was for domestic students, and that would extend to international students if they've said things like the Department of State has been doing, and Department of Homeland Security, we find out they've been involved in doing something similar, and it may be a joint effort. I'm sure there's some collaboration on this in terms of what's being scoured, what's being used. But the article that we just shared is from Inside Higher Ed. It says Trump administration to search non-citizens' social media. And it's formalizing that policy. USCIS will collect applicants' social media handles. This is on entry into the country. At the border, CBP will be able to, as they have been informally since the first Trump administration, when social media was used, particularly after the travel ban went into place in 2017, was used to put students into secondary, any non-citizen into secondary review once they entered once they came to the border and presented credentials. And I've had this happen to me, even coming back from Latin America. Have my phone, my iPad, my laptop searched for content that may be problematic to the government, and this was over a year ago now. So there are ways that social media has been used already, but now they're putting into a formal process in DHS for their border folks. They are also there's some folks that have put or are tracking it, both the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed, and I'll drop the Chronicle link. They're tracking where the students who have have had their SEVIS records terminated or visas revoked. And again, those are two different things, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But that article, the Inside Higher Ed article, we also have a couple of others. We have had some good news when the question is the legal system going to save us? There was a Chinese student attending Dartmouth who, once his SEVIS record was terminated, filed suit right away to appeal the decision. And the initial ruling by the local judge was actually a federal judge, reversed the student's status revocation. So it was actually, I think, a SEVIS record termination, and then that was appealed because the basic gist of it was that the government had no grounds, did not have evidence, and that would need to be demonstrated at a future hearing. So there are some initial signs. There was an article we also covered last week where in California and Pennsylvania, there's a couple students that have filed suits against the government's actions revoking their student visas. And then we also see a legal brief. Clark University, as well as 85 other higher ed institutions, have signed an amicus brief in the AAUP, that's the American Association of University Professors, versus Secretary of State Rubio, supporting the motion to enjoin the federal government's policy of revoking visas of and arresting, detaining, and deporting non-citizens and faculty exercising free speech and associated rights. So that case will be going to the courts. So there is significant action that is being taken in the courts, and that is the only way, because you know the Trump administration is not going to just stop because someone told them, because it's against popular opinion. They're going to change. They're not going to change unless the courts tell them to, and then even then they'll appeal it all the way up if they have the choice. But what we really see happening is, as we talked about last week, it's chaos theory. They're trying everything under the sun, seeing what sticks, seeing what the courts will allow, and then if they get batted back on some things, they change it and modify it and then adjust it perhaps, and narrow that focus, because perhaps there are students in this country that are espousing terrorist views that, yes, should be deported if they're supporting openly terrorist organizations, because it is a right, not a privilege, to be in the country. We've talked about that the last month here, and that's certainly what the government's position is, and that won't change. And there are legitimate national security interests involved. If someone is supporting terrorist organizations from within the United States, that is not a citizen and can be deported. We've seen Taliban supporters or Al-Qaeda supporters that were U.S. citizens that were overseas that actually got taken out by the government in previous administrations, Republican and Democrat, over the last 25 years of our involvement in the Middle East. So that happens. But for non-citizens, this is something that the government has taken seriously, and there is a legal basis in terms of the way the powers given to the Department of State are. So it's a question that's not going to be answered easily or soon, but the initial signs from some of the early legal cases are positive. And it's a sad state of affairs that we're having to rely on the legal system to help correct the overreach by the current administration, but it's a reality we face. And it's also, when these cases get heard and decided, hopefully in our favor, of the international education profession, these are testaments to the strength of our country that can prevent, though it's short-term pain for the 1,000, 1,200 students that are impacted here and their families, but we still have over 1.1 million other international students here that are doing everything right. And I guarantee many of the students that are in that 1,200, most all of those students are being dragged into this poorly implemented generative AI bot campaign to root out anybody who has a criminal offense, down to a parking ticket or a speeding offense, which are not criminal. At that stage, those are not even misdemeanors. They're finable violations. They're not breaking They're not felonies. They're not even misdemeanors. So these are things that our country holds value in, is that this legal process can resolve overreach by the government and correct wrongs. And so the early signs are we're seeing some of that happen, but it's awful for the students that are going through that right now, and we all get that. All of us who have on campus been sending those emails, having those unpleasant conversations with students about what they can do next. What we're advising is they all need to get an immigration attorney, because we can't do that. We just can't as an institution, a public institution. But will the U.S. legal system save our international students? I think the chances are yes, they will. The legal system will, but it's not going to be pleasant along the way, and there's still a lot more stories we're going to hear that will kind of turn our stomachs in a lot of ways. Do want to finish quickly with a couple articles on what's happening in Australia. They've got elections coming up, and the opposition party, which is likely, at least opinion polls seem to suggest they are likely to win the election, has a very anti-international student agenda. Whereas the current administration, if they are reelected, has already put in place, though they haven't put hard caps on, they have put in place stricter visa requirements. They've upped the English language proficiency, upped the amount of money that needs to be provided, that are putting on kind of informal caps on individual institutions in terms of how many international students they can receive. Obviously, as you know, in Australia, there are far fewer institutions, probably 40 or so universities and another couple hundred vocational institutions. So for that country, a transition to the opposition party would mean decimation of the international ed profession in that country. So the articles I've dropped into the chat will give you kind of a flavor for what to expect if you're watching the Australian market. So we think we have it tough. It's even tougher down there, where the opposition government could be putting in place Canada-esque reductions, perhaps even further than that, to really damage what's happening with international education in that country. So again, that global perspective is also important to keeping our focus on what we're doing and understanding that, yes, it's harder for us to promote the U.S. as a destination to students abroad right now from certain parts of the world. It may be next to impossible, particularly when these travel ban countries might come down in the next month or so. But we have to be focused on care for our students, number one, and understanding the strengths of our country, number two, as an overall value to those students coming in. And providing advice, qualified advice to future students as to what you need to be aware of. And that if you have anything on your social that is even hint anti-American or expresses biases, obviously the Department of State has been collecting social media information for the last 7 years since the Trump administration formalized that through the DS-160 process. They've been doing those social media checks on visa applicants over the last 7 years. How well it's implemented in different posts is a little bit less clear, but certainly the case is what students say on social matters, and if they want to come here, they can't have things on their social that are anti-American or anti-causes that this government supports. So that's certainly something, food for thought, for advice as admissions professionals, as international student advisors, that we need to keep in mind moving forward. It's not the best advice we would hope to ever give to a student, but not the most positive advice, but it's the realistic advice for the environment we currently exist and operate in. So that's all we have for you today on the Roundup. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation. Really look forward to chatting with you more in the weeks to come. Cheers.